Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Following the Call, Living the Sermon on the Mount Together. We are on chapter 5, and this is the chapter that deals with Matthew 5, verse 3, poverty of spirit. So let me just read that verse. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And this chapter has excerpts from 3 different writers and thinkers. Philip Yancey, who also quotes Monica Helwig, Eberhard Arnold, founder of the Bruderhof, and Dorothy Day, a social activist and
founder of the Catholic worker movement.
So Philip Yancey talks about why would God single out the poor for special attention over any other group? It is kind of confronting, also because why would anyone wish to be poor in spirit or impoverished in any sort of way? So he talks about how poverty is not a choice of your own necessarily, but those that are poor have no other choice but to completely rely on God and the grace of God. So that's why you're in a position where God's grace is the good news and most accepted because there's no other alternative. So he says he begins to realize why so many saints voluntarily submit to the discipline of poverty. Dependence, humility, simplicity, cooperation, and a sense of abandon are qualities greatly prized in the spiritual life, but extremely elusive for people who live in comfort. So people that have a lot of gifts and attributes and are naturally beautiful or full of richness tend to be successful and then don't necessarily need to rely on God for God's grace and mercy. They can rely on their own strengths. And then Eberhard Arnold talks about dismantling our own power and how difficult and challenging that can be. And then Dorothy Day talks about how precariousness is essential, how it's an essential element in voluntary poverty, and why that's important.
And we should just define what she means by precariousness.
Yes. Do you want to do that?
Sure. From my understanding, it's just the complete dependence on God, not knowing where your food is going to come from, not being sure whether your housing is going to last. And she points out how many, communities that start, either monastic communities or communities like the Bruderhof that start in voluntary poverty, and everyone sort of takes this on. And over time, through the hard work of the members, the communities thrive and tend to expand and become more stable, and they lose this precarity. And that is a challenge for established communities that were established with a commitment to poverty.
I think both of us could see that within our own church, the Bruderhof, how, the foundings of the Bruderhof were humble and very precarious. And the church had to rely on God every single day to get through it. And many miraculous things did happen where they were cared for, and God provided what was needed. And now that, we have grown to this point and we have banded together, it's very hard not to thrive, and it's actually a good thing to thrive. But then it's also the willingness to constantly confront this within ourselves.
And challenge ourselves.
Rely on God no matter what. And also just use what we have for others that are less fortunate and struggling.
Yep. Yeah, I think those are all very, very good points that you glean from this. And I think we should reflect a bit on the fact that this beatitude is the first beatitude. And what is the significance of that? Is poverty of spirit necessary for us to experience any of the other riches and graces of the Sermon on the Mount? And I think obviously the answer is yes. Without poverty of spirit, without humility and acknowledgement of our own weakness, as Paul the Apostle writes, how he boasts in his own weakness, and how power is made perfect. God's power is made perfect in weakness. Without this, coming down from our whatever human achievements we may have attained, God can't work in us. And Eberhard has this line, which I love, where he's talking about the community, the Bruderhof community. He says, if a little power of our own were to rise up among us, the spirit and authority of God would retreat in the same moment and to the corresponding degree. And I think that's because that often happens. You know, you don't heroically decide one day to become powerless and to become spiritually poor or indeed materially poor. Because as Doreen mentioned, if you work hard and you know, try to do your best every day, you are going to, you're generally going to thrive. You're generally,
and also work together.
And you work together. So it is a matter of grace, really, when we can allow the power of God to overwhelm whatever human power is in our, you know, in our fellowship or in ourselves personally.
Well, I think in just reflecting on this chapter, aren't we all poor in spirit? I mean, I think it's pretty pretentious to think that you're not. And I think we're often completely blinded to the fact that we are because these other superficial elements that we think we are overwhelm that sense and need for God. So I kind of took it as a blessing on all of us in a way. And actually, you know, I was just reflecting recently on the fact that, like, with the advances of technology, the internet, and how that is especially affecting young people and causing a lot of disillusion and depression, sadness and hopelessness, because it just exploits all our insecurities. Even more so today, I think we're really poor in spirit. And in the age of information, somehow it's perhaps easier to forget that. And maybe it's just like that reminder that we need to remind ourselves, like, we need God. We can't do anything without him. And
right.
We can't do it. We have no spirit without God, without Jesus' commands. And
the challenge is to find joy in that. I mean, you can be poor and miserable and grasping and materialistic and wanting more for yourself, and, you know, in that way be no different than someone who is wealthy. So it's embracing this abandon, this reliance on God, sort of actually being kind of reckless in your willingness to let go.
Do you have any examples of that, you know, from our church struggling with this?
Yeah, I mean, we've struggled with this over the years many times. Like, how do we retain this poverty? And it's not just, you know, a spiritual thing, and I think it also is a material thing, because material things are what make us secure.
Yeah.
So several years ago, we read about this Jesus sending out of the 70 apostles and the instructions he gave them, and just in a spirit of wanting to be obedient to Jesus and wanting to have that same dependence on him, we asked you know, several people on every one of the Bruderhof communities to go out 2 by 2. Sometimes it was a husband and wife, sometimes it was 2 single people, with basically no money other than a bus ticket or whatever, to go to a city and then really rely on the leading of Jesus. And I've spoken to several people. I myself was not sent out on one of these expeditions, but I've spoken to several people who were, and they said, you know, it was you know, a remarkable experience to, you know, land up in a city, not be sure where you were going to sleep or find food. And it was terrifying in a way, but then to have to rely on prayer. And in many cases, not all, you know, they found a place to stay, they found people, they found connection, and, you know, made relationships and connections that, you know, that last to this day. But even more importantly for them, it was the people who experienced this, it was the first time that, you know, some of these things really became real in their own lives. So in a way you could say this is maybe a bit absurd and silly thing to do, but I think, you know, a lot of the gospel, if you look at it, is absurd and silly if we really take it seriously. So not saying I recommend that for everybody, but I think it is important to test ourselves, challenge ourselves from time to time. Like, how do we really show our dependence on God? And many of the people we look up to, right, from the past, St. Francis of Assisi, Dorothy Day, many others, Gandhi, not a Christian, but were people who, renounced material security and comfort, and that's why their lives speak so strongly to us to this very day. So,
yeah, so true.
Anyway, very interested in anyone's thoughts on this. Did we talk about? So in Matthew, the beatitude is "Blessed are the poor in spirit," and in the Gospel of Luke, it's "Blessed are the poor." And what is the difference between those? And that'd be something I'd be interested in. And is that an important distinction? So I'd be interested if anybody watching this has any thoughts on that. You can just drop your thoughts in the comments. All right then, take care.